Fourth type of learning theory we're going to be examining is iconic rote learning. So iconic rote learning is making an association between two or more concepts, but in the absence of conditioning. So how do we learn in the absence of conditioning? Well, we learn through repeated exposure. So for example, if I said to you that I want you to remember a phone number, the way that you're going to remember that phone number is by repeating it over and over again in your head, assuming you didn't have a pen to write it down. So I'll give you a phone number now and see if you can remember it at the end of the lecture. If I said my phone number was 055 159 3142, the only way you're going to remember that is by repeating it over and over and over again. Now, in reality, you can't really remember 10 digits. It's probably too much for you to process. So you're going to have to break that down into chunks. And even in the way I said the phone number, you can see that the chunks are already there. So I said 055, that's the first chunk of information. I said 159, that is the second chunk of information. And I said 3142. So now you only have three things to remember. But you still have to remember those three things. You're going to have to repeat them over and over again in your head if you want to remember the phone number without writing it down. So I'll ask you at the end of the class, at the end of this lecture recording, if you remember that number without writing it down. But if you keep listening to what I'm saying, chances are it's already gone. So a lot of children's learning actually happens this way. So I have two young kids and I read them books and I say, what is that? It's a dog. What is that? It's an elephant. Like, no, it's a cat. Or, but through repetition over and over again, they work out what things are. It's the same way we learn a language. So if you're learning a second language, it's through iconic rote learning, through repetition, you're learning what all the nouns are. Very little critical thinking goes on with learning a language. That's really only happening when we start conjugating verbs and when we start to think about the way language is structured. So much of our low involvement learning is iconic rote learning. So, when you're cramming for the test the night before and you're just trying to memorize the slides, just reading the slides and you're memorizing it, and the information is just going in and is going to stick there for a very short amount of time and then disappear. You're not engaging in any critical thinking, just for repetition by reading the slides, by reading the dot points over and over and over again, trying to memorize them. That right there, is iconic rote learning. So in some schools, they encourage iconic rote learning. You're encouraged to remember your times tables. You try to remember all the countries in the world. In other schools, in other countries, the emphasis is more on critical thinking, on reasoning, which is the next learning theory that we're going to cover. But in marketing, as a tactic that is implied, that is used, we often see iconic rote learning as a foundation of a lot of branding. So showing a brand over and over again. So through repeated exposure, you're showing your brand name and people get to learn what your brand stands for. A lot of advertising as well. If you want people to remember the phone number or remember your slogan or remember your locations through repeated exposure, they will iconic rote learn what your brand is about, where you're located and what your phone number is. While we're on the topic of phone numbers, can you remember the phone number I gave you? It wasn't my phone number, so don't try calling it. But you probably couldn't because you weren't repeating it over and over again. And that repetition would have been required for you to engage in the iconic rote learning.